You could sue me if I don't.
All right, thanks for your patience, everybody. I had a meeting that ran slightly over. Just wanted to get everything set up. Yeah, and we're going to jump into feature testing. It's an hour-long lesson, and I'm going to try to go quickly through it so we can cover all the material. But of course, if any questions come up, please do raise your hand and we'll get to it. So yeah, I have a few slides to start us off with, and then the plan is to go through an example and then also give you time to practice this in pairs. So I'm going to leave this slide up here for a couple of minutes before I call on some people, and I'd like to hear, yeah, just take a couple minutes to think about these questions, and I'd like to hear what you all think. In the setlist app, if you've been watching the homework videos, which I hope you have, what does a user do to visit the song's index? Meaning, what actions do they take? What do they click on? Do they do any typing? And along with that, what does a user expect when they visit the song's index? So take like a minute to think about that. Sorry, I got rid of my window, but give me a second, I'll get it back up. Okay, so I'd just like to hear what you all are thinking about. Kevin, what does a user do to visit the song's index? Just this question here.
Do they just type in slash songs, backslash songs?
Yeah, so if they're in a browser, they're going to visit this path, right? And I think we could expand on that and include the domain. So they'll type localhost or whatever our domain is /songs. Cool. Before they can type the path, what would they need to do to be able to type this in somewhere and get something out of it?
Oh, they'd have to run the Rails server.
Yeah. So if we were a user looking at our own app, we would need to access a running server through the browser. Okay, cool. Let me hear from somebody else about what a user expects when they visit the songs index. Whoops. Gunnar, what would you expect if you were going to the songs index in the setlist app? You're muted.
Sorry. I would think like a list of songs, right? Or like, well, we don't have any songs in our index yet, but you'd think to see a list of songs.
Right. Look, we can assume that we have the data and say that they would expect to see a list of songs. Maybe they would also expect like some attributes for those songs or something like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you all. Yeah, nothing fancy here, but just a thought exercise, because today we'll be talking about feature testing, which means that we're talking and thinking about how a user experiences our app. So feature tests are meant to mimic the behavior of a user. We should be able to use automated tests, feature tests, to click things, to type, to click like buttons and expect to see something on the page. Our test should be able to verify that a user would see a certain thing on a page or not see a certain thing on a page. And the key thing to remember about feature tests is that they do not need to know anything about the underlying code. Anything that the user would not know about, your feature test doesn't know about. So a test that a user can create a new task should not check the DB for a new task to be created. It could check to see that a user sees the new task on the task index page after they fill out the form. So that's an important distinction, that a feature test does not need to know what's going on in the database or any of that underlying stuff. It would be testing things as a user experiences them. We use Capybara to do this in R-Spec. It is a feature testing framework and a library that we install by putting it in our gem file and running bundle. This gives you methods to interact with the web page, and it provides a headless browser is how we would describe this. So it provides a browser, or like the simulation of a browser that is running in your feature tests instead of needing to actually go into a physical browser to click on things and interact with a graphic interface. Lee?
There was something that you had said about with feature testing. It's really important. It was kind of at the end and I missed it.
That's okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. I'll leave this up here for like a couple of like a few seconds so that people can take notes. And I'll also just reiterate what I said. Feature tests do not need to know things that a user wouldn't know. So when we're adding we're testing that a user can create a new task, for example, in Task Manager, the feature test shouldn't check to see if there's a new task in the database, because the user doesn't know what database we're using or what the tables look like or anything like that. But the feature test could check that if I fill out a form and I click on a button, does the page redirect to the index and show the new task? That's something that a user would know about. Cool. Thank you for raising your hand and asking that. I definitely don't want to go too fast to cover these points. Cool. So as we're looking at Capybara, this is the feature testing framework. And here, I think this is where we were at, and I'm going to list out a few important Capybara methods that you'll probably be using a lot. But there is also some documentation linked in the slides where you can look through more of the Capybara material and the things that it gives you. But some key ones are visiting a path. So you can just give it a path and say, visit some path. That's the equivalent of opening up or running Rails server, opening up your browser and typing in /some/path on the end of your domain. Another method you can use is current path. So this is really useful in expectations. If you think of your R-Spec expectations, it's usually like expect something to equal something else. You can say expect current path to equal /some/path. So that's really useful for testing where your browser lands or what path you end up on. Gives you the method page. So you can say things like expect page to have content or to not have content. There are methods for filling in fields with data. You can say fill in, and then you give it an argument of the name of the field you want to fill in. And then the second argument is a keyword argument with, and then, whatever you're filling it in with. Also, don't feel like you need to necessarily memorize or write all these down or anything like that. These are just some examples of things we would expect to do in our feature tests, and the documentation will go through these in like a lot more detail. So there's click on, click link, click button, all things that Capybara gives us. Have content I mentioned earlier. So a very common one is expect page to have content or expect page to not have link, that kind of thing. And the slides are linked in the calendar event, so you should be able to get to this GitHub page. It's the Capybara documentation. And actually, I think it's worth probably taking the time to look here. And I have this dropping you off into the section labeled the DSL. And I think this is the most pertinent for what we're doing right away with Capybara. And these are just some examples of things that it gives you. Yeah, Alex, do you have a question?
I have two questions.
Okay.
One, all of this stuff is happening, but not actually requiring anything to pop up on a website somewhere else, right? Like local 3000 doesn't need to be triggered or something. This all happens from the terminal, right?
That's correct. When you run your feature tests in the terminal, everything is happening in your test environment at a test level. You don't need to open a browser or anything like that. Your Capybara allows your tests to do all that for you and automate the entire process. It's still good. It's still good to manually poke around in your browser and actually physically check that you can interact with your app the way that you expect. But the idea with feature tests is that you can always have automated tests that are verifying the basic functionality for you as
Cool.
well.
And then other question,
Mhm.
this all happens in our R-Spec file, right? Like the have current path, have this, have that, do this, do that. That's all in the R-Spec.
Yep, that's right. The other day we talked about model tests being under spec models and then having our spec files within there. Same kind of pattern with features. We'll have, you'll see in a second when we do an example that there will be a directory under spec called features, and then directories for each category of feature tests you'll be doing underneath that, and that's how they're organized. Mark?
Just curious, like when we use these like gems like Capybara, do they kind of refer to the GitHub, like those kind of all those things?
You're asking when we use gems in our projects if they all have a repo on GitHub that we could go look at to reference, or
does it work where it's using those I guess the stuff in the GitHub, like I guess Capybara or like Active Record or something like that?
Sure. This is probably not true of every dependency or every gem, but in a lot of cases, you'll be able to Google a tool or a gem or a package that you've installed and see that it's hosted on GitHub. So Capybara, for instance, this has documentation in the README, but then also like source code.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. There are other, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are examples of gems that we would not be able to go look at on GitHub. I just don't know off the top of my head what those would be. Cool. So my suggestion for reading more about Capybara is to follow this link on your own time and read from the beginning of the section that's called the DSL up until working with Windows. There's a lot of other good information in the README, but some of it is not going to be directly applicable. Like for instance, sections on how to set up Capybara outside of a Rails app. We don't really need to concern ourselves with that right now. Cool. Any other questions about what feature tests are at a high level or Capybara before I move on to talking about user stories? Lawrence?
Apologies if this is getting ahead. You said there'd be folders for the kind of features you're testing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that to do with the with the pages, or do you group them by clicks, forms, or is that just going to be dependent?
Yeah, good question. Typically, we're going to group our feature tests, and there. Let's see, what was I going to say? Typically, we'll be grouping our feature tests in directories that have to do with the models. So if we have CRUD pages for or CRUD interactions, I should say, for like a task, or in set list, like if we have CRUD for both an artist and a song, our file tree would look something like spec features artists and then the individual test files in there, or spec features songs and then the individual tests inside of that directory. Does that answer your question? Molly?
I guess this is maybe just a question about, are we going to go through like a TDD workflow of some sort? Okay, then I'll wait on that.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, we'll talk about user stories a little bit first, and then I'll go through an example of writing a feature test and implementing that with TDD. Sorry, thinking in my head. And then there are some extra practice exercises linked in the lesson plan. And the setup may be a little bit different depending upon which repo you use and where you start writing your feature tests, but we can kind of get into the nitty gritty as we move away from the slides later in the lesson.
Cool. Okay, cool, thanks.
Sure. All right, so let me throw this up here one more time and we'll talk about user stories. So we've already introduced user stories to you all in the form of your project, but we haven't talked about where they come from or what their purpose is. And these are a tool used to communicate user needs to software developers, and they're utilized like pretty frequently in the world of software development. If you're working on a team and you take a Jira ticket, for example, you take some kind of Kanban style project management ticket, often the described behavior will be in the form of a user story. And in the same vein of our tests wanting to behave like a user would, we start planning out our test based on what the user story describes. We want to test exactly what the user story describes as far as behavior. So these are used in Agile development. If anybody's ever heard of Agile development versus Waterfall development, or the group of people who like under the term extreme programming, essentially Agile was created as like a better way to manage projects and to help developers be more efficient and spend more time building what the stakeholders really want in a project, versus the waterfall approach where all the specs are described and then maybe developers work on it for like a 2-month, 6-month, 1-year period, and then they come back to the customer, to the stakeholder, and say, look, we built you an app, and then the customer's like, this is not what I wanted at all. That can happen sometimes with waterfall, and with Agile it's more of a system of checking in frequently and iterating on what's already been built, and user stories were introduced as a part of that. If you're interested in where user stories came from, or Agile, or what extreme programming is, I'd recommend looking into it on your own time. We won't cover it a lot right now, but just to give a little bit of backstory on where user stories came from and why we use them, that's sort of the history there. So user stories describe what a user needs to do in order to fulfill a function. So thinking back to like those first couple of slides, what actions do they need to take? What do they need to type? What do they need to click on, etc. And we consider these part of top-down design. You can think about writing a unit test or a model test for a very narrow piece of behavior, and then TDDing that to create like a method, and then writing another test to tie that method into a bigger piece of functionality. That would be more of a bottom-up approach. But when we're thinking about the end result, we're thinking about what the user eventually wants to do on our app. That is, by definition, a top-down process. So we can still use TDD with a top-down design process, but instead of testing the smallest piece of code that we can and building from there, we're thinking about the end result and following our errors to sort of work towards that functionality. So here's an example of a user story. As a user, when I visit a homepage and I fill in the title and I fill in description and I click submit, then my task is saved. So these will almost always start off with a phrase that says as a user or as a user type. And that might seem like a little bit of, I don't know, overkill right now, because we're all the same type of user. We only have one generic user, but as you move forward into mod 3 and beyond, you might have different types of users. You might have guest users, you might have logged in users, admins, members, the list goes on. So these open up with what kind of user this is describing an interaction for. And then it follows the format of when I do something, and then you can chain on indefinitely, and I do something else, and I do something else. Because some of these user stories might be very complicated. If I think about maybe I'm writing a test for a feature on one of those airfare matching websites, maybe that user story would go something like, as a guest user, when I search for a one-way flight, and I filter by date, and I filter by price, and I click book flight, then I am prompted to log in, or something like that, right? So these can become very complicated or be very simple. The main thing is you open up with the user type, you have some actions that they need to take, and eventually you get to then expected result. So this would be the user story for writing a test for the songs index, and we'll need to get all set up on the same repo and branch to walk through this, which I'll get to in a second. But this would be a user story for writing a test for the songs index. So as a user, when I visit /songs, I see each song's title and play count. We could make this maybe even more accurate by saying, then I see each song's title and play count, but essentially that's the same thing. Cool. So that's a brief intro to user stories. Probably nothing that didn't kind of explain itself as you looked at your user stories in the projects, but good to have that background information anyways. Any questions about user stories before we jump into practicing this on our own? Okay. in my notes. Give me a second. Okay, so we pull up the lesson plan. I would say we will need to be following along with the lesson plan that's linked in the calendar. So I'm going to grab that real quick. And I have been meaning to update this lesson plan to be more reflective of the set list app that you all are familiar with from the homework videos. I haven't quite gotten there yet to update the lesson plan. So I would ask you to hang in there with me and bear with me as I try to figure out exactly how to get you all set up. So skip past this warm up setup gems. I don't think any of this is going to apply to y'all. And actually this repo could use an update because there's a broken dependency. So we're just going to skip past this whole section. And in the lesson plan, we'll be starting at this always, always, always write tests first. So that's where we'll start when we follow along with the code. But in order to get set up with the code, I'd like everybody to go ahead and actually, let me see. Could I get a hand raise if you do not have a cloned down copy of the setlist tutorial repo that we've been doing in the homework videos? If you do not have a copy of this repo, can you raise your hand? Okay, few people. So, okay, all good. I'd like everybody that doesn't have a copy yet to go ahead and navigate to this repo. I'm going to drop it in chat. And if you have this repo already, go ahead and get that opened up on your machine. So go ahead and clone down this repo. And once you get it cloned, you're going to check out the branch. Let me double check the branch name so I don't lie to you. Yeah, I'm in the right place to get branch.
Jameson, I don't have that specific set list tutorial. I just was following along in the homework and created my own set list. Should I have this tutorial one specifically?
I think what you have will be fine, but in this branch that I'm having people check out, I had deleted the features directory underneath spec so that we would be starting from scratch. So it's up to you if you want to maybe check out a branch, like a new branch on your repo, and then just delete the spec features directory. That's fine too. Okay, so for those of you who are like just getting this cloned down, clone that down and then check out you'll need to do sorry, I'll start over. So you'll be cloning that down and then running git fetch. And that's going to just to verify that you have all of the branches. And then you should be able to do a git checkout feature _ testing. I'm going to pause here for like 2 or 3 minutes just to make sure everybody is on the same page and we all have a repo that we can work with. Cool. I see Alicia and Alex, you have hands up. Is that from not having a repo or did you have other questions? Okay, just double checking. Jameson?
So is feature testing an already existing branch, or is that just for purposes of us playing around?
Feature testing is a branch I pushed up to the set list tutorial repo earlier today. So that should be a branch that exists. Yeah. So if you have this repo and you don't have that branch, you'll need to do a git fetch. And if you still don't see it,
and that didn't come through.
So you have sorry, go ahead.
Is it because we're not supposed to fork it, or does that? I forked it and I don't have that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that why?
Probably. So yeah, I think that would affect whether or not you can, because it's technically a new repo. Your fork is not the original repo. So if you're in the situation that Jameson described, or if you just forked it or whatever the case may be, what I would recommend is checking out a new branch, calling it feature testing, And on that branch, you can delete the features directory that may already exist from the previous tutorial. So that way we're all starting from the same point.
Where is the features directory? Is that
Okay.
what level down?
It'll be underneath spec right here. What you eventually want to end up with, and what you should end up with if you clone down the setlist tutorial repo and check out that new branch, is you should have at the root level a spec folder and a models folder underneath that, but no features directory underneath spec.
Sweet, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else have concerns about getting set up on a branch where we can work on feature tests? Just raise your hand and I'll try to work through it with anybody who's having an issue before we get started. Kevin?
Oh, what terminal command do we do after git fetch once it's cloned in?
You should, if you do a git fetch, you should be able to do just git checkout feature testing, like
okay.
So.
Great, thanks.
No problem. Noah?
I had also made my own, and I was just trying to catch up in a particular way. I have a spec directory and a models directory under that. If I'm making that from scratch, do I need to make sure that there's anything else in there? It's a spec folder with a spec helper that just has an empty models folder under. That's all I need?
That sounds great. Yeah, and
Okay.
It sounds like you already have like your R-Spec gem installed and all that good stuff, but you don't have
Yep.
any feature tests written, which is pretty much where we want everybody to be for this lesson. Cool.
Okay.
All right. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully everybody can follow along to a degree. I think we probably should have made this a slightly longer lesson than we did, but we'll do our best. So I'll walk through a process for writing a test, and then after that, just open it up for people to have time to practice on their own, in case, like, especially in case you were following along and something went wrong and you couldn't quite get to the steps that I got to. And thank you for your patience with the setup and everything like that. I do think that it's kind of nice that we're troubleshooting some GitHub and version control differences in class, because we don't really have any class time dedicated to working with GitHub or working with branches and things like that. So anyway, thank you for your patience there. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. As an alternative to actually coding along, I'm loosely following, or well, I'll try to closely follow it, but the practice exercises at the end, I'm not sure how applicable they'll be. But I'm basically starting here, like I said, at the always write tests first section of the lesson linked in the calendar event. And we're going to start with this user story and just go through the process of writing a feature test and go from there. So if you are not following along with code, or you get stuck for some reason, you can definitely follow along in the lesson plan and hopefully still get something out of it. Cool. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that user story. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that, or not paste. I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, and that's where I'll be starting my test. That's what I'll use to start my test. But I don't even have a test file or anything like that. So we've been talking a little bit about like the directory structure and where our feature tests live. And that's the first thing I'm going to do in my terminal here. I'm going to make a directory for spec features. I already have a spec directory, so I'll say make directory spec features. And this is where all of the feature tests are going to live. The next thing that I'll need to do is make a directory within there for the type of test that I'm writing. And right now I'm writing a test for the songs index. I need a songs directory. So this is going to be make directory spec features songs. And there you see it pop up. I'll pause here and just mention that this isn't a hard and fast rule. There are various ways to organize your tests, and some of that may come down to a team's preference or personal preference, but this is one structure that we recommend. You know, having your features directory is necessary. Within that, I think it's helpful to break up your test files into directories that are named based on the model of interaction that they're testing. So when I go and write an artist spec later, I would also make an artist directory underneath features. So now I'm gonna create my test file within this songs directory by saying touch spec features songs index underscore spec.rb. You all have worked with R-Spec already, so this is probably like just a good reminder. These tests need to have underscore spec.rb at the end of them, or they will not run. And you can even get false coverage numbers in your coverage file. If your tests are not running, it'll look like everything's passing, but they're just not running to begin with. So make sure that that naming convention or that naming rule is something that you're following. Cool. So now we have our test file and we have the directory all set up, and I can come into here and at the top of every spec file, we'll need to require Rails helper. That's going to load up the whole application and everything that we need for our tests to run properly. And the next thing I'm going to do is just paste in this user story that I grabbed from the lesson plan, and I'm going to comment it out. And this will be my North Star, my guide for how I write my tests. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is set up my R-Spec describe. Just see how we describe this in the lesson plan so I can stay consistent. And I'm going to call it the songs index page. We give that a do and an end block. In the lesson plan, you might see something like this key value pair of type feature. This is optional, and you would really only need this if you didn't have a directory named features. But I'll just leave it there because it doesn't hurt to just have it here. So if somebody were to come in and look at my spec at first glance, they could see, oh yeah, this is a feature test for the songs index page. If this were a model test, you could replace this with model, but that is optional. So I'm going to call that, yeah, I'm going to leave it as type feature. Okay. I'm also going to set up an it block with empty quotes and a do end. How are people feeling so far? Does anybody have questions about what I've done? Lawrence?
Sorry, I'm sure this is obvious, but are we going to go over model testing?
So we've had let's see, I should double check the calendar before I speak. But I would recommend going back and reviewing this class that we had on Monday, if anything's still fuzzy. Yeah, but there's also a testing best practices lesson that I think we don't have on the calendar, but you could definitely go look at that lesson plan too.
I apologize. I must have rabbit holed at some point. Thank you.
That's okay, no worries. Yeah, it was another short class, so I would expect people to benefit from like reviewing that video. It's a lot of material and not a lot of time. Cool, so I'm going to continue on and start writing this test. I would say, let's see, I'm reading my user story to myself. I'm thinking about how I want to describe or how I want to define this it block. So when I visit the songs, I see each song's title and play count. So I think this it could just say, it can see, I'll do the exact words that are in the lesson plan for consistency, can see all songs, titles, and play count. Okay. So the first thing that I'm thinking about here is what I'm expecting to see, and that would be a song title and a play count for every song in the database. But we need to remember that our test database is separate from our development database. So in this environment, I don't have any records yet, which means I'm going to need to create them. I'm going to say song1 equals song.create. And I am just going to grab the values that we have in the lesson plan. And another thing that I want to do here that I would suggest is adding a bang to the end of your create. And what this does is it will raise an error if you run your test and for some reason the song was not created. So yeah, if that were to not happen, it's possible that the test would fail and the error message you would get would be cryptic. And the reason for the failure was because there was no model for some interaction to happen. Jennifer?
Is it required or important to have as a user somewhere in describe
or no?
No, not right now. I think a common thing that you might see as things increase in complexity is something like another describe block as a guest user, for instance. And then all of the user stories that have to do with a guest user would be inside of that block. Some
Okay.
people might also use context instead. So context as a guest user or for a guest user. Yeah, that's how I would denote that if it were relevant. But for now, I think that kind of goes beyond the scope of what we need to do.
Thank you.
Sure. So I have song 1 here. I'm going to do the same thing for song 2. I'll say, oops. Here to my proper indentation, song 2 equals song dot create with a bang. And just to make sure I have the same values as the lesson plan, I'm going to copy and paste those over as well. And I anticipate that we might need to do a little bit more setup, but I think that'd be an interesting error to run into together. So I'm going to continue. And what we'll do now is we have to tell Capybara to navigate to the page that we're testing. So that would be visit and then your path, in this case, songs. Now I can expect page to have content song 1 dot title. So here is some more Capybara that we're introducing. We have our standard R-Spec expect to, and then the things that we're adding are the methods page and have content. These are things that Capybara provides. So this is just saying, when I visit the songs page, the page that I land on, this HTML document, I expect it to have this content somewhere there on that page. I'm going to go ahead and do that for song 2 as well. We want to have the song title and we want to have the song play count. And then I'm going to add some expectations for the play count for both of those records as well. So now instead of title, it'll be play count and play count. Alex.
There would never be a situation where you would have things visiting multiple sites in one test, correct? Like if you're saying page, it's like in this example, it is always songs.
I'm going to answer that in like maybe a roundabout way. Page is always going to refer to whatever page Capybara is currently on. So there could be a world where we have a test that says it can filter songs by tags. And then we might need to, let's assume we have our test set up. I'm not going to create the record, so this is mostly pseudocode, but you could see a world where we would visit songs and we would expect page to have content, and it would be like all the songs. So I would just put everything that I have here already, but then maybe I want to say click on only show new songs. And once I click on that, I would expect page to not have content, I don't know, old song.
That makes sense, like a not query and more of a command thing that changes.
Right.
Right. Okay.
I would think of this page, I would think of this as a method that will look at whatever document Capybara has landed on. So you can say visit, you can say click on, you could visit again, you can do that indefinitely. It's not always the same page. That has to do with the instructions you've given Capybara. Yeah. Does that clear it up?
Absolutely.
Awesome, thanks. Cool. Okay, other questions about what I've written so far? What's coming up for y'all? While you do that, I'm going to be opening up another page. So in this case, we do already have this implementation. But I have a couple of things we could try here. Yes, Natia.
So are you supposed to have an expect statement for like every column you expect or everything you expect to see on the page, or like to what extent do you need to test?
I think the more thorough you can be with your feature tests, the better. That being said, it's not as important to cover everything 100% with feature tests as it is to cover everything 100% with model tests. The way that I approach this is I read the user story and I try to translate that as directly into a test expectation as I can. So in this case, as a user, when I visit /songs, I see each song's title and play count. I would want to verify that if I have multiple songs, which I do here in my setup on these lines, if I have multiple songs, every song in my database it should show the title and the play count for every song in my test database. So if this said songs title and play count and artist, I would also want to verify that I had song1.artist.name. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, sure. Jameson?
Could you speak a little bit of what's going, you mentioned that we have a test database that we're holding these songs.
Mm-hmm.
Is it kind of like, are there like tables for each one of those in tests? So like segments, all of those song entries in the database?
Yeah, let's see, how can I talk about this? So yes, these variables or these records that I am creating in this it block are going to exist as long as the it block does. So outside of here in another it, like it does not show song, I don't know, popularity, which isn't the thing, but right. I would not be able to access song 1 here.
Okay.
This no longer exists. There are ways to set up your test so that you can do, like, I'll just type it out here real quick, but this is like nice to know information. We'll cover this again. Before each, you can do something like this and set up your tests there, or sorry, set up your models for your tests there, but they do need to be instance variables for the test environment to know about them in all the different it blocks. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about like the finer details of the test database, but I would say the important takeaway for today is that the Rails console environment, the Rails server environment, those two are the same thing and they are entirely separate from your test environment. So that's why we have to actually set up records here every time we write a new test. You could maybe explore in Postico on your own time and see if you can observe like those tables being populated and then torn down at the end of a test, but I just don't think we have time to get into that right now. Joe?
Yeah, I was just looking at the lesson plan and the way they wrote out the test for the play count. Looks like the actual string with interpolation doesn't matter if we do it that way or if we do it where we're just pulling like the data point out.
Yeah, good question. So what you're describing here is we're expecting that the page would actually have this whole string of play count and then like a colon, and then we would need to interpolate our value there and then close our string. So I think that in most cases, a test like this is a little bit better, especially when you're testing like data points that wouldn't be obviously like clear to a user. We would want to put somewhere in our HTML like, hey, this is the play count, so that whoever is using the page knows what the heck this number is, right? And if you have something like that in your HTML, it might as well be tested in your feature test. But testing that the play count appears on the page is better than not testing that data point at all. Cool. Let me think here. So I really was hoping that I would have time to go through and like remove the functionality so that we could go through the process of TDDing this, but I'm just going to run this test for now and see where we're at, and we'll get to what we get to. So I'm going to say R-Spec, and I am a big fan of running the specific test file that you are working on, just for simplicity. So features, songs, and I'm going to run index spec. If I wanted to only run this one test, maybe if I had like 12 it blocks in here or something, I could tell it to run like this, and then it would start running whichever test is on line 8. Oh, gosh, do I need to bundle still? I think I might have some kind of syntax error. Bear with me. I bundle exec just in case. Okay, I think I just needed to use bundle exec for this environment. So validation failed, artist must exist. So this is what I was referring to earlier when I said, oh, I think we're going to have to set up something different. What this is telling me is that a song needs an artist in order to exist. And I'm going to take a quick peek at my schema to see what I need in order to create an artist. So artists just have a name. Ray Jepsen, right? So this is a little bit of maybe a sneak peek for tomorrow, but now that I have this artist and I know that these songs I'm testing need to belong to this artist, I'm going to create them through the association by calling the variable artist.songs.create. So this syntax will create a song for this artist that is stored in the local variable on line 9. The other way that I could do this is I could keep this as song.create, and I could give it an artist ID here in as an argument. So I could say artist ID is artist.id. I think this would also even work with just giving it an artist. Any of those ways are fine, just as long as the song can be set up and have an artist and be ready to run the rest of the test. I'm going to run this, and I think we're expecting a passing test at this point because we do have the implementation code written. Oh, but not exactly the way that our test is set up. So let's go ahead and walk through what it would look like to debug this. So I'm going to look at this and see expected to find text, play count, whatever this number is in songs. I really like you with this play count, and then the length, and et cetera, et cetera. So one of the gems we had you install was Launchy, and this is kind of a cool debugging tool. This seems like a good place to try it. We can do save and open page and run the test again, and this will open up the HTML document in the browser, and I can see exactly what my test is seeing. To bring it over here. Right, so I have songs I really like you, play count, length, call me maybe, play count, length, and what is the failure? I'm going to read the failure as I look at this as well. So it looks like play count 24381, 0867, 0867. Molly, do you see my mistake maybe?
I think it's just a capitalization thing with play count is not, the count isn't capitalized in yours and it is in the.
Yep, I think that's it. Good eye. Let's try it. Oh, that's going to open up another window. Oh, well. Okay. Yep, that's what it was. That's a passing test. So one more thing I want to demonstrate, and that's if I did not have a bang on these song.creates, I'm going to go ahead and change this back to how I had it. And let's say I forgot that I needed an artist association. And I didn't have a bang on these creates. That's going to fail silently. And I'm just curious what error I'll get if I run the test now. And I'm going to get rid of my save and open page because it's annoying. All right. Oops. Getting rid of this too. And now all we have is expected to find text. I really like you in songs. The text isn't showing up. That's where we're failing. And this could be really confusing if I didn't already kind of understand, like, oh, wow, I don't even have a song to iterate over by the time I get to the view. So that's why we recommend adding in the bang, because now I'll get that error that we got the other time where it'll kind of give me the hint like, hey, I can't create a song without an artist. Artist must exist. So this is a much more helpful error for getting closer to the test that I want. Okay, so I'm gonna, let's see. I did put a Jamboard link in the calendar. I just want to double check that and make sure I didn't miss anybody's questions. I know that I said I wanted to leave time for people to practice, but this hour just flew by. So I think what I'd rather do with our last 5 minutes is take any other questions that are coming up for y'all. And before I send you off, I will give you an idea of how to get some practice with feature testing. Jack.
So I guess I'm a little confused about the order of testing. Should we be doing feature tests first before everything? Or should we be creating our models and model tests first and then doing the user stories?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good question. What I would say is I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong way to do it. It depends upon how you want to do it. But what works for me and what I see work for people very often is to start with a feature test, especially because when we look at, especially like in projects. So if I go to the relational Rails, and I'm just, maybe I have my database set up and I feel good there, but I need to get started on functionality. And it's like, oh my God, where do I even start, right? So what I think works really well, really often is to take a user story and start with that. And you can build that out, TDD, the whole thing. But eventually, let me see if I can find a good example. Sorry, give me a second. Yeah, so maybe we get over to user story 16 and the user story says, I see a link to sort the children in alphabetical order. And then I'm taken, when I click on the link, I'm taken back to the index page where I see all the parents' children in alphabetical order. So at some point during this user story, I might be TDDing. And then I realize, hey, I need a method to do this alphabetical order logic for me. And then I start thinking about that method. It would be perfectly valid at that point to put a pin in the feature test and go write a model test, write the method, make sure it's returning you the raw data that you want, and then return to your feature test and drive it from there. It would also be okay, I think, in my opinion, especially as you're just getting started, to continue with the feature test, write the method, get your feature test passing, and then go and retroactively test your model method. Also fine, as long as it gets tested on the model level. Is that helpful, Jack?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sure, no problem. Okay, other questions, Caleb?
Hey, I feel like this question may have already been answered in kind of a roundabout way, but I wanted to ask it again.
Sure.
In the event, say we were rendering on our page the lyrics as well, and in it, we're testing to see if the title exists, but the title's not rendering, but the lyrics are, so it's seeing this instance of Call Me Maybe, but it's really not the title. Would we circumvent running into that error by including the string interpolation, or is there another way to do that?
There is another way to do that, and I'm really glad you asked about it. So one thing that you can make use of is, let's say, maybe we have two different artists that have a song with the same title, and we want to make sure that both of those songs are showing up, and not just like a false positive like you were describing, where we find the literal text for, maybe we have Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen, and then we have Call Me Maybe by Justin Bieber. I don't know. So the page could find the Carly Rae Jepsen version of Call Me Maybe and return us with the test we have right now, it would return us a pass. Like it would say, yes, I found that. But you could do something like, and again, this isn't perfect, I'm not going to run the code or anything, but we could have, this is just pseudocode, but if we had artist.each artist, and then we have like an end. And then here inside, we would be doing like artist.songs.first.title. What we could actually do is set up some HTML here that would have like an ID of something, and we would interpolate we would actually have to do this with ERB tag. So that would be, I'm sorry, this is like very verbose, but it's a good thing to talk about. So here we would interpolate the artist ID, and we would put whatever code we want in here for the song title, right? This will allow us to target within this div in our test. So this would look something like within, don't quote my exact syntax, but it would be something like within, and then we would have, basically we would be looking for this string. We could maybe preface it with artist and then artist ID. So we could say artist, and then we interpolate the actual artist ID. and give that a do block, and then we can write an expectation as normal. So then if we had artist 1 being Carly Rae Jepsen, we would be testing that we're only looking in the block for that specific artist for this song title. And then if we had artist 2 with the same song title, we would do another within block for them as well. So this within syntax is super, super helpful for cases like that, where it's not super clear, or where it's ambiguous which one is being matched. And this can show up with, like, if you have an index page with a bunch of delete buttons for every single record and you try to tell Capybara to click delete, it will send you back an error like, which delete? I don't know what you're talking about. There are 15 of them, right? And the within do, that's super, super helpful. Kevin.
Yeah, I see you're using the div tag for HTML. Is that better than using the section tag? Because I've been using the section tag for those within tests. Are they exactly the same?
I don't think they're exactly the same. I forget. I think one of them only renders inline. I would have to look up the rules for which semantic tag is better for this task. I was just kind of throwing something up on there as pseudocode. But yeah, there is a difference between div and section, and I would recommend looking into it when you get to a point where you need to use one. I think section is generally what I would reach for in most cases.
Thanks.
Sure. Okay, I'm a minute over, so I'll go ahead and, like, y'all can go ahead and leave, but I will stick around for like the next 20 minutes to ask any other, or to answer any questions that came up during this lesson. And oh, actually, before you go, if you want to practice this, what I would say is take these practice user stories and see if you can implement them in your version of the setlist tutorial repo that does not have any feature tests yet. And it says to go ahead and use TDD to implement the feature. Again, I apologize, I haven't updated this lesson plan yet, but you may run into a situation where the feature is already implemented on that branch, because all I did was like get rid of the feature test directory. So if you can't use TDD to implement, that's okay. By all means, feel free to go delete that functionality and start over in TDD the whole thing. But do try to make some time to take these practice user stories and practice writing these tests in the setlist tutorial repo that you have, whichever one that is. Any questions about these practice user stories or how you can actually get some hands-on experience with feature testing? Can I make anything more clear? Okay, then that's it for class today. But again, I'll be here for like another 20 minutes if you want to raise your hand with any questions we didn't get to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Susie.
Jameson, could I ask a project question? Actually.
Sure. That's okay. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, just to clarify, I don't know if I had read the direction wrong for the first user story, but that should be a welcome page with both pairs relationships on there. Like, are we supposed to have a welcome page?
I'm pulling up the stories to double check, but I think the answer is no, that is not defined in the user story. Yeah, so if I look here at user story 1, this is the parent index. And actually, this is a good exercise in looking at user stories. So I think I will share my screen again. So just to clarify, Susie, you were asking specifically about the first user story, right?
Yeah, so I had understood this as like when you visit localhost 3000/parents, then you're supposed to get the parent index, but only one, right, of the pair.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so at any point are we supposed to have a welcome page either for our specific parent-child relationship or for our pair,
Gotcha.
Parents?
No, we're not expecting that you build a welcome page exactly like you saw in Task Manager. You certainly can if you want to. If you find that that makes the site more usable and you like that pattern, feel free, but it's not a requirement. The expectation here is that you would just visit the URL, and if your parent is like, I know somebody has ice cream shops. So if your parent is ice cream shops, then you would visit localhost/ice cream shops, and then you would see all the ice cream shops listed. right? And then the same with the child. When you get to the child index, you would type in a certain URL and with the name of the child table. The usability stories that we have, so we are asking you all to build some links to those pages, but we're hoping to see them, we are asking to see them on any page of the site. So a child index link, this should appear everywhere you navigate to, and you should be able to click it from any place. Does that clear that up a little bit?
Yeah, that does clear it up. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm so glad. Noah?
It's kind of a follow-up question on that. Are we free as well to nest the child index in a parent index if it makes the site make more sense? Like, are we free to make those kind of calls, or should we more narrowly focus on the interaction pattern?
I think that the user stories are going to be giving you the answers for most of those things, especially when it comes to nesting and what your path should look like. So for example,
well, I guess I said that incorrectly, because like the path is still the same path, but you don't see the child, like a link to the child index until you're in the parent index, but you click on it and it's just, the path is just straight to the, it just makes the layout kind of make more sense in a case.
Gotcha. My take on it is, first, I would suggest don't make extra work for yourself. I think it's really easy to think like, oh, I would expect the page to do this, but we wouldn't want you to get in a situation where you get down a rabbit hole or build it a certain way, and then you run into a user story that you can't complete for whatever reason. First, a piece of, and this goes for the whole mod, I would just say, if you aren't asked to build something and you're not to the point where you're doing extensions, I would advise that you don't make extra work for yourself. That's just
okay. Fair.
But secondly, I think if you do get to that point where you want to add some usability features that you're just interested in, like certain links that would make sense, just make sure that they don't conflict with anything that we've asked you to build. So if I go to like a usability story, yeah, regardless of what else you add, we definitely want to see this link at the top of any page. Every page on the site would be another way to say this. When I visit any page on the site, I see a link at the top of the page that takes me to the child index. That does need to be there because it's detailed in a user story. So you could add something else if you want, but we tried to make these so that you could get to the indexes just no matter where you are in the app.
Okay.
Cool. What other questions are coming up? Testing, project, meaning of life. I don't have an answer to that one, but Zach.
So I'm trying to play catch up here with the set list. I'm getting a no database error.
Gotcha. Do you mind sharing your screen and we can look at that together?
Of course. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So set list test does not exist. Yeah. This is probably happening because you have not run a Rails DB create. That's my first guess. So can we try that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime you have like a new repo that you're going to have to run Rails DB create, apart from just the Rails new, because this is actually setting up your database. So can we try to do what you were doing before and see if we get past that error?
Yeah.
There you go. On to something different.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course. Regina, I think I saw your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so it's a project question. So you create you do your migrate, and then it creates this table for you. But then I did the migrate command and I wasn't supposed to yet. So I tried making a new table, and I'm trying to take this table instead. And oh, can you hear me?
Yep. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. I'm trying to take this table instead and use it. Oh yeah, and use it instead where here, I'll just share my screen.
Sure.
Am I frozen?
You appear kind of frozen.
Oh, I'm frozen. You can move on.
Okay, cool.
I have one more question about like the projects, but
Sure.
with the feature spec. So one of the things I noticed was like for the way that the feature specs are written in this set list example, there's the spec doc, and in features, there's like one that particularly checks like the relationship between the one and many table, right? Like the songs. Like, so when I was following along the spec for the mod, like the show spec from the video, I have like one for my parent table, a show spec for my parent table, and then a show spec for my my child table. Is it supposed to be in one like associative feature index spec, like instead?
I think I understand what you're asking, but do you have your repo handy so we
can-
can look at it together? Cool,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
should have started with that.
That's okay.
So here is like, this is my test here. What is it? My project. And then this one's the set list. So it's following along with it. And it looks like we have the features and then specifically like the songs, this index. Oh God. This specifically tests the relationship between those two models. But then in my project one, I had like a separate show spec for my parent table and then a separate show spec for my child. So is this the proper structure?
Gotcha.
that I should work on? Or-
Okay, I think I understand what you're asking because you're pointing out, and I'm going to annotate on your screen to try to be more clear. You're pointing out that here we are setting up an artist and we're setting up a song and we're making sure that those two are associated with each other, and then we're continuing with our feature test to make sure that everything in the user story is working, right? And
Yes.
in your project, we have I'm seeing something kind of similar here. So maybe you can like tell me more, but I see you have your set and you have a crystal and these are associated, and then you're continuing on and doing your test. What I will also say based on what you said, like having a show spec for crystal sets and having a show spec for crystals, if this is if the set is the parent and crystals is the child, yeah, we would want to have a show spec for each model that has a show page.
Okay. But then this one.
So here, all we're testing in the set list example that we went through today, we are only testing the index page for songs. If we also had an index page, like we should test the index page for artists as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. So there, it's not necessarily like that this way that is the right way and this way was the wrong way. It's that like I should be doing both those things, right? Like index for crystal sets and index for crystals.
Yeah, and I would even say that in a way you're further along than we got with our tests today in class, because you actually have a show spec for your crystal sets, you have a show spec for your crystals, and then as you create like an index page for each of those models, you would want an index spec and an index spec in the corresponding directories.
Okay.
And one more thing that I'll point out is that we are not testing any relationships here. We're not verifying that those relationships are working properly inherently. We just can't set up our test without them. Like we can't run our test without them. Where we're testing those relationships would be in the model test. So if you go to like artist spec, and I don't think I see any model tests in your project yet, which is fine. But see, this is where we would be testing like the methods, and you see here on line 5 of index spec, or sorry, of artist spec, it should have many songs. That's actually testing the relationship.
I see. Okay, thank you. That clarifies it a lot.
Cool. I'm glad.
Okay.
Anything
I
else?
really appreciate it. No, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Jameson.
No
Have
problem.
a good one.
Likewise.